Fantastic. Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here at Ecobuild. Really passionate about infrastructure, being 30 years in the sector, coming in as RICS president in June. Number one priority for me is infrastructure and actually taking infrastructure globally. Anthony's asked me to basically set the scene for this session this morning in terms of thinking about how do we drive value out of infrastructure, and what an exciting time to be in infrastructure when we've basically got the golden age, as I would call it, basically with huge investment coming in from government in terms of £400 billion worth of investment looking forward to 2022. The last time we had this level of spend was really when we were back in the Victorian ages. We were building sewers, we were building railways, they were planning our towns and basically taking us forward in terms of the infrastructure that's still very much with us today. So what are we doing now? We're building very big sewers. We're building high-speed rail. We're actually looking at our cities. We're thinking about cities in terms of place, and actually how does the digital economy really start to drive that value through our infrastructure piece. And we need to think differently about building future Britain. And I think you're going to hear from a number of the speakers that follow me about effectively what that means. EY have worked with the London Chamber of Commerce and also London City Airport, writing a report about London tomorrow and actually starting to think about London tomorrow and what does that mean for us. When you're talking about driving value out of infrastructure, the number one barrier to driving value is actually around indecisiveness. So what we really want is decisive planning and strategic planning about what we do around our infrastructures, which will then allow us to take the whole thing forward, because that's quite important. And I think that's where really the National Infrastructure Commission have a massive, massive role in terms of helping us with that pace and change of driving through infrastructure. They've got three key priorities at the moment. We saw the energy report come out last Friday, so really reviewing what we do in terms of driving that value through energy. Also obviously looking at the Northern Powerhouse, and then picking up about London and in particular Crossrail 2. But for me, value is defined through three key lenses. Benefits delivery, so how do we really drive those benefits through, particularly when you start to look at the public and what do the public want. And it's also doing more with less. So whether that's actually getting more out of our existing infrastructures, or actually sort of starting to think about new infrastructures and what can we actually bring in around new infrastructures, really, really important to start to think about what can we do in terms of driving that value through. But also really thinking about driving out value for money. So how do we kind of get that real value drivers into the heart of everything that we do? And how can London and our cities actually keep pace with the change when you've got mega cities, cities like Shanghai, 23.4 million population, actually being greater than countries like Australia? So actually, what's the role of cities, and how does London and actually all of our cities in the UK actually compete on that global stage? To do that, we have to drive out value through our infrastructures and through what we're effectively doing with our infrastructures. So for me, this is really, really key in terms of thinking about resilience and also thinking about change around infrastructures. You've seen it in the mayoral manifestos. I had the pleasure of actually hosting one of the mayoral manifestos for the built environment, and also went along to the first one. They've basically got three kind of key themes when you talk about the ambition for London. It's effectively growth, and how do you achieve growth, and why does growth matter? It's then about housing, and it's then about infrastructure. And actually, for me, it's a trilogy. You can't talk about one without talking about the other, because they basically have this impact, one having the impact on the other. And actually, how we drive growth through our infrastructures is absolutely key in all of that. So, growth, when you kind of think about it in terms of 51% now living in our cities, to kind of compete on that global stage, we've got to have growth at the heart of what we do. That means that we have to invest in housing, we have to think about our housing for London, but we also have to think about our infrastructures for London and what do we need to be doing around that. Quite frankly, there is no easy solution to all of that. We have to do everything, and we have to do it well. And obviously at the heart of all of that is is planning. And we have to think about planning in terms of actually how's that actually a growth enabler and how's that going to help us to drive value out of our infrastructures. Quite interesting when you think that effectively the figures from the LGA show that nationally there are 475,000 homes with planning permission waiting to kind of get off the blocks today. So it's not always our planning systems that are actually are blocking housing actually coming on stream. 1.3 trillion is the investment that's needed for infrastructure here in London. That's really important in terms of, again, how do we get the maximum value out of our infrastructure? And we've done some really great things in terms of building big infrastructure programs. Of course, there was Eurotunnel coming through. We've had the Olympics and we've had Crossrail. And what was great was to see the Crossrail Learning Legacy launch the other week, where actually what we're saying is if we can really start to share the knowledge that we've gained through these infrastructure programs, so ODA kind of effectively passing that knowledge on to Crossrail, Crossrail now passing that on to the IPA, we've really got an opportunity for the first time to really start to learn the lessons from the past and therefore really start to drive value through the infrastructure programs. So at EY, we've been looking at 5 key areas that we've wanted to work on when it comes to driving that value. One is actually the role of clients. So actually clients have a really important role in terms of the decisions they make and how do they drive out value. The second one is around smart cities. And what does smart mean for our cities? How do we get that connectivity around cities and start to think about cities as more than sort of just individual places? So how do we get that kind of like connectivity going through? Also, how do we deliver mega projects? We haven't been delivering mega projects in this country to the scale that we are at the moment. And we talk about effectively in 2019, if we don't start particularly addressing skills and resource shortages, Britain stops building in 2019. So that's a really key thing. So we have to think about how do we plan mega projects and how do we think about delivery across the whole of the UK in terms of driving that value out. Also, asset management. So asset management is really key that great to be talking about it at Ecobuild. You have to think about the decisions that you're making right from the onset in terms of, one, future-proofing our infrastructures, thinking about what does that mean, but also right the way through the cycle of design, of construction, of cost in use, and then whole life cycle. Because actually, the one thing with infrastructures is they're with us for a very long time. And actually investors are really, really interested in our infrastructures. We saw that with City Airport recently being sold to the Canadian Pension Fund, 32 times EBITDA. There is an interest in infrastructures. And one of the things I think with the PPPs and the PFIs that we've actually done in this country is that actually, now we're seeing those kind of coming to the fruition, it's actually stimulating an interest in infrastructure that perhaps we haven't seen at this sort of level. But at the heart of that, and again, really important for today's session, is innovation. Innovation really matters in terms of thinking about how do we drive out value. And I think about it in terms of like really having a telescope, and you're actually looking at the reverse end of that telescope and planning for tomorrow's future today. And how do we do that? Through the technologies that we know about and also think about the technologies that aren't yet invented. Really pleased again, EY, a partner of HackTrain. HackTrain actually really looking to look at particularly digital technologies and what can we be doing about bringing that through into particularly the rail sector. So how can we use disruption and technology together to really drive out value, particularly for the travelling public, and also thinking about that in the context of place and in terms of cities. So a lot going on in terms of just what is that pace of change. So you could kind of say, well, why does that matter? Well, it matters because we actually have value leakage. And we have value leakage to the level of £682 billion worth of leakage. And that's a lot of leakage in our projects. So we need to kind of be thinking about how do we bring that value into everything that we're doing. And I'm really passionate about this in terms of what can we be doing. As I say, it starts, I think, very much with our clients. And how do we help our clients to think through these big projects on a number of levels in terms of how do they make the right decisions through the process that they're going through, RICS have published the Informed Infrastructure Client Guidance Note to actually help our members actually work particularly with their clients in terms of thinking about how do you become better informed, because if you're better informed, you're actually more intelligent in those decisions, and actually you're able to drive through the strategic change. And also when we sort of start to think about that in the context of how do they work both with the supply chain and with the consultants, and also gear up for the types of organisations. You look at something like HS2, and effectively you've got an organisation that's going to be around for the next 20, 30 years while we actually build the project. But actually a lot of people are going to build their careers around HS2, so it's about a business alongside a major project, and we need to think about that, and we need to help our clients actually plan for the decisions that they make, and also thinking about particularly the supply chain, because whether you're using on-site or off-site manufacture has a really huge impact in terms of actually the knock-on effect around the economies around you. And again, really sort of thinking about tomorrow's technologies today and how do we build that in. So I think for me, clients are absolutely at the heart of this. So whether you're building big infrastructures or actually whether you're looking at our cities, driving value comes from, I call it the power of 10, and that's what's the 10 great minds that you can actually bring together around a city, both from the public and the private sector, that really are passionate about what you're trying to achieve. And if you've got that power of 10, basically what you can start to do is really bring those people together around a common agenda. And actually what you want is different thinking, because that's basically at the heart of everything in terms of driving that value through infrastructures. So essentially, Anthony, I think to kind of sort of sum up, I think driving value is absolutely the heart of the debate, and it's now how do we do it? And we've got a number of opportunities to do that, particularly around digital, data, clients, mega projects, our smart cities, and taking everything forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Round of applause. Thank you very much. Thanks, Amanda. £682 billion worth of value leakage. That's quite a big number, Amanda. How do you get to that number? I suppose, and for you value? How do you describe value? Value for who? Value to who?
Well, I think value comes at a number of different levels. So you've basically got value, obviously, that's in the business case. So that's what the client would kind of be seeing, and that's all about benefits. So it's how do you drive sort of benefits out through these big infrastructure programs, and essentially that's about saving people time. Is kind of like quite a big part of it. But what we do see with big infrastructure programs is actually we still aren't learning the lessons from the past. That's why the Crossrail learning legacy is really important, because it's how do we really learn those lessons and then build in a better way of doing things going forward.
So if you live in Plymouth, is high speed 2 good value for you?
I think it's good value for UK PLC, and that's effectively what you've got to kind of be looking at. And I think that's what the National Infrastructure Commission are looking at. It's about how do we kind of make sure that the UK and our cities within it are actually competing on that global stage.
Anyone got any questions I want to put directly to Amanda here about anything particular? Yes, far away.
Hi there.
Hi.
Just very quickly, you mentioned the investment community. Sorry. You mentioned the investment community. You also mentioned Crossrail, the Olympics, City Airport, HS2. How are we going to get the investment community to invest outside of the southeast of England?
I think it's really interesting because I had the pleasure of actually hosting China when they were over, so part of the UK-China Business Summit. And, when you kind of see the level of interest that they have, and it was actually Professor Brian Cox that we were talking about the One Belt, One Road. And you kind of you think about One Belt, One Road, I don't know if everybody's aware of it, but, a massive infrastructure ambition, I think it's fair to say. And his words kind of ring in my ears because it was one belt, one road, one northern powerhouse. So, can we kind of start to think about connecting infrastructures right in the north? And I think, when you look at particularly cities like Bristol as well, what they're doing around sort of intelligent infrastructure planning, sort of using and thinking about their city in a different way. Bristol's quite interesting because it's the most inland port that we have in the UK. I didn't know that until recently. but it's how do we kind of like maximise that? And I think we have to think outside of London. So for me, it's not an either or, it's got to be both. We've got to be thinking about the Northern Powerhouse and all of our cities. And again, I was delighted to actually be part of the launch of the Cities for Growth Commission report, which was back in 2014. But actually really starting to think about that Northern Powerhouse. And I guess one of the things for me is thinking about the devolution agenda and making sure that that doesn't detract, particularly through new mayors coming on stream. So again, that's where my power of 10 comes together. Let's get the new mayors in some of the new cities actually working together and working collaboratively so that we actually make sure that all of our cities are competing on that world stage.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Thanks very much. We're going to call it a day there because we've got a lot to get through. Thank you very much, Amanda Clack. Thank you very much.
Thank you.